Hello, this is Jay. This is a question I'm often asked. Why did I decide to sing classical music after singing in punk rock bands for most of my teenage years? Well, I love music, first of all. It's my passion, it's what keeps me going. And I like all kinds of music. I am not closed-minded. I'll listen to anything from, you know, punk to hip hop to R&B to pop music to anything that floats my boat, I guess. And classical music I discovered when I was older than most people. Um, Growing up in my house, I had my brother Paul, who's 12 years older than me, rest in peace. And by the time I was 2 and 3 years old, all I ever heard in the house was rock and roll. Was bands like Led Zeppelin, Kiss, Alice Cooper, Black Sabbath, Aerosmith, Iggy and the Stooges, New York Dolls, all that great stuff from the late 60s and early 70s. And my brother was the first kid on the block to have long hair, which was a big deal in the late 60s, early 70s. So, I grew up a very rock and roll type baby, became a big Kiss fan, was very inspired by their do-it-yourself attitude. They took a chance. They wore costumes and makeup, and not everybody liked them for it, including the kids in my neighborhood. Used to chase me around and try to kill me because I was a Kiss fan. So I was always sort of a misfit. Then, of course, around 78, 79, I got into punk. I got into the Ramones and Blondie and the Sex Pistols and what other bands from that era, and just loved it. And was blown away by my first Ramones concert in 1980 in Central Park, and just thought they were the greatest thing. So started going to clubs at a young age, had a fake ID, seemed to look older then than I do now, which is funny, and was an obsessive Ramones fan from like 12 to 14 years old, saw them maybe 50 times, went everywhere on the East Coast that we could possibly go. I had older friends, that made it a lot easier. And then I got into hardcore and started hanging out on the hardcore scene in about 82, and started Apple up by 84. Did Apple till about 88, but around the same time, I got to see the movie Amadeus, and it really blew me away. I never thought that what I always pictured the music of the aristocracy would actually have a composer such as Mozart who wouldn't kiss their ass, marched to the beat of his own drummer and eventually paid for it with his life by dying at 36 years old, which is kind of a shame because he was one of the greatest musical geniuses of all time. So, started listening to his vocal music and I fell in love with it. And I had never been professionally trained before. All the years I did Apple when I was a teenager, never bothered to take a voice lesson or anything. So when the group disbanded in October of 88, about a month later I started up with professional voice lessons, and I was hooked, and I just loved it. I loved the whole process. Um, Eventually wanting to become a voice teacher myself. So decided when I went to college that I would be a music major because I just had this hunger and this thirst to learn everything I possibly could, especially coming from a punk background where people were so shocked that, this punk girl can sing opera. So I started studying my favorite thing, which is early music, about music from the Middle Ages till about 1840. Composers like Bach and Vivaldi and, of course, Mozart and Haydn, and, too numerous to name. And for about 10 years, I studied very hard. I took lessons every week. I learned how to read music. I learned how to play piano, trombone, violin, and I specialized in music education with the hope of teaching music to whoever wanted to learn it. And unfortunately, when I graduated with my degree, there was no work. So I ended up in music retail for a long time. First working for sheet music places, which my ability to read music was an absolute necessity. And then working for big stores like Virgin and HMV, becoming a manager at both places, and at HMV eventually becoming the classical department manager and buyer for about 2 years. Got to hire my own staff, make their hours, do payroll, all kinds of interesting stuff to learn about how to run a business, and tracking sales of the CDs, things like that. And that kept my interest alive over those years. And then in around the 2000s, I decided that I missed playing my true heart, which is punk rock, and that maybe I could put to use what I've learned over all of those years into singing now. And I'm glad I did, because music is music. It's whatever turns you on, and I can go from one radio station listening to, you know, body count or something like that, and then switching it right to QXR and listening to Symphony by Tchaikovsky, and getting the same rise out of both. So I highly recommend that if you're not a classical music fan, that there is something for everybody. There's over 500 years of music out there, and take a listen. You never know, something might strike you. And to remember that these composers, they were really servants of the aristocracy. They worked for kings and queens and counts and countesses and nobles and lords. And, you know, they didn't really have much freedom to do what they really wanted until about the 1800s. And that's when composers such as Beethoven kind of broke away from always having to be employed by a royal post. And that's about it for that. And anyone wants